So this is the HeyGears Reflex RS, and it is a really interesting machine. From my experience of using it so far, it's like the Bamboo Lab of resin 3D printers, which has some massive pros, but also some cons as well that we'll talk about as we get into this video. Now, full disclosure, the team at HeyGears did send me this pre-release printer over, along with their wash station and also their cure station. Now, it's not a sponsored video, but I did want to let you guys know that they did send me this over to get my thoughts and feelings on it. And I'll do my best to keep it as unbiased as possible as I go through this video. So first up, let's get the techie bit out of the way. And basically, this was a machine that comes with an 8K screen and it's 10.3 inches, and it gives you 29.7 mms in terms of quality, which is always nice to see on there. So the Reflex is a relatively quick printer, printing at on average about 4.5 seconds per layer. So it's going to give you both accuracy and a decent amount of speed as well. It's also got some smart functionality on there as well, so it's got force value monitoring, so that way if your print starts to fail and it's not detecting that suction and everything on the FEP, then it'll detect that and it will also notify you that on their application. And it also has residue detection, so if you go to print and you've got something left in the vat, it will also notify you of that, so that way you don't end up destroying your FEP or destroying your screen, more importantly. There's also an optional extra, so you can get this heated resin tank as well, which is always nice to have, so that way you don't have to have a separate enclosure or worry about heating through different methods. And then it's also wireless as well, so you don't have to physically be with the machine all the time and plugging USB stuff, so you can link it up with an application on either your phone or on your laptop or computer, depending on how you use it. So with all the techie stuff out of the way, and before we get onto the things that I really like about this machine and some of the areas that could be improved, let's talk about the elephant in the room. And that is that it's more of a proprietary machine. Like I mentioned, this is almost the equivalent of something like the Bamboo Lab of resin 3D printing. And straight away, the first thing I noticed when I got this was these resin bottles. They are very, very different to anything else that I've used. They're basically like cartridges that slot down the back of the machine, and you tell the software what resin you're using from HeyGears, and it does all of that tinkering in the background for you. Again, big pros and cons there, and we'll come on to those later on, but the downside of that is it is all proprietary. Everything's locked down within their own slicer, within all their own software, and you are only meant to use their resins with this. So for some users, that's going to be a big win. For some users, that's definitely going to be a downside. Now, I will say that it does work with other resins. I've tested it out with some Sunlu resin. I've also tested it out with Wargamer resin, and I got some good prints with that. So they don't officially state anywhere that you can use other resins, but other resins do work on this machine and they work perfectly fine. And I'll probably do a follow-up video in the future where I test out a few more resins and go through that. So that is the elephant to talk about in the room, that you don't get to tinker as much, you don't have as much control over it, and you are a little bit more limited in terms of like the slicer and everything else there. So just one thing worth considering. Now, speaking of resin, the resin I've been using the most with this printer is HeyGears Past 10 resin. Basically, it's their most affordable resin that they do, and it's going to be rebottled, so it won't come in one of those like cartridges that you slot down the back, which HeyGears claim will make it a little bit cheaper, so that way it becomes a much more affordable option. Now, I've done a whole bunch of stuff with this, and pretty much all of them in this like almost purpley grey colour have been printed off with this, and honestly the quality looks fantastic. I also did my drop test using these little demons by One Page Rules, and I always use these demons because they're really fiddly. They've got all these spindly little parts like these sword connections, all these horns and like tails and stuff like that. And basically I dropped 15 of them from different heights, and I found that 13 out of 15 of these survived, so it had a really good durability score as well, which surprised me because out of the bottle they feel quite rigid. So some of the more flexible resins I've used in the past, when you kind of squeeze them and stuff like that, you can feel them flex. These have a little bit of flex, but you don't feel it quite as much, so they do still feel rigid, and you might be able to see that on the camera. The sword piece is bending a lot, so I'm getting a decent amount there. So nice score that, 13 out of 15 of the demons surviving. So even though it is their more affordable and budget resin, it looks fantastic, but probably most importantly, if you're into miniature printing, it also performs really well if you drop it and smash it or bend it or anything like that. So that's always good. Now I'm going to put this aside and we'll get on to the things that I like about this machine. And there is a lot to like in my opinion. The first one is the user interface and experience is really, really good. It's got a really well thought out application, both on the phone and on a laptop or a computer, again, depending on how you're using it. And unlike other ones where you can kind of like monitor the time it's going to take to print, you pretty much have control over everything through these. So on the phone app, for example, I can see how long my print's going to take before it finishes. I can see things like the temperature on there as well to make sure everything's within the range I want it to. I can see things like the FEP life, how long that FEP's got before I need to maybe do some maintenance on it. Shows me things like the resin values within the bottle and within the vat itself as well, so that way I know if I'm running out of that. There's a load of things that you see on there. I really like the slicer, and again, going back to that elephant in the room, It is the slicer that you have to use, but it works well. At least it's not a crap slicer, which is always nice to see. Everything works the way I expected it to, but more importantly, you can work locally on your device that we don't have to connect to the internet, or you can work online as well using the cloud. And when I'm using the cloud bits, basically you slice everything on the slicer, and then I can send everything wirelessly to the printer and prep it all that way. And again, on the slicer, I can see things like the temperature and all the values of my printer, just if there's any maintenance that's needed. Now, the great thing about this is it's not just a good app, it's a good user interface. So when I go onto the slicer, the first thing it says is finding your model, linking it all up, and I can do any software updates that I need to. But you choose your model that you're going to print with, and then you choose the resin that you're going to be using. So depending on what type of resin you're going to be using, HeyGears have a whole range of different ones. You've got like their prototyping resin, so that way, if you are starting to manufacture loads of miniatures that you want to ship out, for example, and you want to test and make sure all the pre-supports work and everything else, how they look when they come off, or if you just want to print off like a whole batch with some of their cheaper resin, you could use their prototyping resin. You choose that in the settings, and then you can choose the quality as well. So you can choose the layer height that you want to use for this. Depending on the resin and the settings they've got, then it will just do all of that fun-fangled bit in the background, so you don't have to mess around with that, which is really nice. You then choose the different type of vat that you're using. So whether or not it's their fancy FEP, which has like the heating in it, and also the peel suction force bit that they've also got available, or if it's just their basic FEP. And then you just go onto it, slice it, and do all your bits and send it over to the printer, and it does everything in the background. For me, this has been a bit of a breath of fresh air, and like I said, some people won't like it because they want to tinker and they want to play around with it, and they don't have that ability within the slicer. But it was really nice just to be able to choose, this is the resin I'm using, this is the quality that I want from it, click print, and then it does everything without any errors. Such a nice thing to have without having to do all that tinkering. It literally took me like 10 to 15 minutes to get the whole thing set up physically and then onto the slicer and have it printing. It was just really, really easy to do. The next thing I like about this machine is it's really solid. And it's very heavy, so just bear that in mind as well. When if you want to try and move it around places, it is a really heavy machine. But it is solid, it's well built, everything feels very nice on this. It does have an up and over lid on this, and some people will like that, some people don't. I'm impartial to it. The build plate has this lovely like lever mechanism as well. So it has this like lever mechanism on it, so you clip it up to take it off, and you clip it back down. It locks it into place really, really nicely. There's no screws or anything like that to kind of take off or unscrew. It's just a nice, simple, easy mechanism to get it on and off. The screen is also a really nice big screen. It's very responsive. And one thing I loved about this screen, although I guess it's less about the screen and more about the software, is it has a full QWERTY keyboard on there. So when you try to connect it to your wireless, instead of using like an old T9 keyboard, where you're like, you can just type your password in. It's so much faster. Not a huge deal because you pretty much only enter your password in there like once, but oh, it was a pleasure to do so. The vat itself is a nice big vat as well. You've got loads of room for all the resin. It's got this like bit at the back, I guess like a reservoir, where obviously the resin cartridge slots down and then it'll automatically refill and pull that from there. So it gradually keeps the resin level all at the same level, so you're not going to run out, well, unless of course the bottle runs out, but at least the application will tell you. And one thing that I really like about the vat is it's got these screws on the side, pretty much similar to every other vat that is out there, but they don't come out all the way. They stop part way up, which means you're not going to lose them. Now, this is a pro to me because I always somehow misplace those screws whenever I take the vats off my resin printers. I don't know how. Probably not an issue for anybody else, but I really like that. I'm not going to lose those screws, so yeah. It's a nice one for me at least. Now, I did test out the residue detection bit by leaving a little bit of scrap in there to see whether or not it would break my screen and the FEP. Bit nerve-wracking when I did this. And it did tell me, it detected something in there. Basically, it comes up with a warning on the screen that says, you know, it's not been able to home the plate properly. Double check and make sure you've not got anything on the plate or in the vat. So it does work. I don't think you should ever rely on something like this. Personally, after every print that I do, I just kind of use like a little silicone scraper thing just to go through the vat and make sure there's nothing in there that seems to be getting in the way. Do your due diligence, because if you rely on just the software and all the fun-fangled bits it's got in there, it's not necessarily always going to work. But it did work in this case, so that was good, because otherwise that could have been an absolute disaster. And then moving on to probably the most important thing about it is how well does it print? And it prints really, really well. I've been incredibly impressed with this printer. And I pretty much say that with all Resin 3D printers now because they're all so impressive. But the thing with this printer is I didn't have to dial anything in. And granted, I know some people will say in the comments, well, you're not allowed to dial anything in. They don't let you do that. That's true. That's very true. But I didn't have to. I didn't have to go through any of the messing around, playing about to get any of these resins working. I just popped my models into the slicer, did the bits, set it to print, scraped them off the build plate, and they all came off perfectly. I've been really, really impressed. Now, I've done a whole range of different things here just to kind of give you an idea of the different qualities you can expect from different scales of things. So started off with these like little Eldar model to go with Legions Imperialis. So these are 8mm scale and they're absolutely tiny. So I printed off a whole bunch of these and then I got carried away and I printed off a whole bunch more as well so I could really go to town. And I painted some of these up as well to try to pick out some of those details there. They look fantastic, like really, really clean and crisp details on here. So I'm really massively impressed with that. Of course, as well, because this is primarily a miniatures channel, I printed off a whole bunch of like 28 and 32mm models as well, so you can see those on screen here. Again, the details are fantastic on there. I wasn't getting any like blurriness. There didn't seem to be anything that was overexposed, and everything just came off crisp, clean, very nice and easy to remove from the supports as well. So it just felt like the balance was right. And I suppose that is the benefit when you're getting something that is, you know, they don't have a whole range of 3D printers. They only have a couple of those, and then they really go to town making sure that they get the right settings for their resins. You kind of do expect that, and you are paying a premium for that as well, don't get me wrong, but it was nice to have and not to have to tinker around with those settings. So these were coming off absolutely beautifully. And then I printed off a bigger piece as well. So this is like a big Blastoise type thing. I'll have all the miniatures linked down below as well, so if you want to check them out yourselves, you absolutely can do. And this came off beautifully as well. Now, the one thing I did notice in this is there's ever so slight amounts of warpage, so when I had to stick it all together, some bits will probably need a little bit of filling in as I get to the painting stage of it, but all in all, that's kind of what you expect with a lot of the resins out there. It looks absolutely stunning though, all the detail on this model. Came out beautifully, really, really crisp, and overall, I've been incredibly impressed with this machine so far, in terms of the quality, and just more importantly, the ease of use, and not having to do the tinkering, because like I said, a lot of Resin 3D printers really blow my socks off every time I use them. But the fact is with this, it was incredibly easy just to get it up and running almost instantly. And I think almost anybody could probably do that without any resin knowledge. So a big, big win there. However, it's not all perfect. And of course, there is room for improvement, as with any machine out there. A lot of the stuff that I found with this was more software-based room for improvement, which is certainly interesting. And it's a good and a bad thing, because obviously software can be improved. And already in the time I've had this machine, I've already had a software update that's come through for the actual app and the PC side of it, but also the printer as well. So that's good to see. They are actively working on that. But then also it is a downside, because you are limited to using just their software. So if the software is not working great, then you know, that's something to bear in mind. Hey everyone, it's Editing Sean here. So just a quick update. I have spoken to the team over at HeyGears and given them all the feedback from this video regarding software, and they've taken that on board, which is really positive, and it's meant to be updated. So the issues that I'm going to go through now regards software at least are going to be updated in the next 1 to 2 software updates. So that's a really big bonus. I've left them in here though, just in case things aren't necessarily cleared up at point of launch, and things can sometimes take longer. And obviously this is my experience having used it and not seeing those software updates as of yet. Now, it's not that the software's bad. I mentioned in my pros, it's one of my favorite things about this machine. It's a really nice ecosystem to work in, but there's some odd things. The first one is that I can't print from the application. So I can do everything on my laptop and send it all over to this. And then I've got to come out of my office and come in here and be physically with my 3D printer and go onto the screen and then start printing. It puts everything into a queue, which is nice. So it queues up all your prints and you come out and you hit print and it does its thing. I wish that I could do it from the app or from my PC. I've done everything up until that stage. It would be nice to. I kind of get it from a, I guess, device safety perspective, that if there is something in there and it detects and says, whoa, stop, there's something in the vat and you're going to smash your screen and everything, you know, check it. But I could just as easily respond to that if it showed me on the application or on my laptop and say, well, actually, we've detected something, go and check on your printer. So it would be nice to have that functionality. I vaguely get why it's not there, but just let me print from the slice, it would make a bigger deal. And especially for the type of customer this is probably aimed at, someone who's maybe going to have a print farm or a larger amount of these, they want to queue up all their jobs, send them over, and not have to worry about them coming out and starting them all up manually. So just, you know, one thing there. Also, the user interface has some things in odd places. And again, this is a preference thing. So some people might really like where they've got things in there. But to move like the plate up and down manually, it's kind of hidden away within like the settings and then calibration you have to go into to then move it up and down manually. Whereas most printers I've used in the past have been like pretty much one click. You click on the bit that says like Z axis and you click it and then you can move it up and down. This isn't there. You have to go, like I said, into settings and another menu to get there, which is odd. So something that could potentially be changed. Next one up, I mentioned that that vat was a nice big vat and everything. And the great thing is it has a pour spout. So when you pour your resin out of it into the bottle, it should go more smoothly. This is a really odd pour spout. It's really big and wide. And I found that if you go too fast, it's going to just pour and just go everywhere and like kind of go back under the vat and stuff like that. So you have to go quite slow and steady on this. It's the weirdest pour spout that I've ever seen on a vat. And it can become a lot more messy. So it would have been nicer if that had just been a little bit more limited so you get the flow going in the right place rather than spreading out all across the vat. It's not the worst design in the world, but for an otherwise pretty impeccable machine in terms of design language and everything else, it just feels like a little bit of an oversight. And the next thing is build plate, lovely, but it's a messy build plate to take on and off. And I don't know if this is something that could be fixed in software, and presumably it could be. So it doesn't rise up far enough from the vat after it's finished printing. So it's quite limited in terms of space. So if you then try to take it off, you can't get anything underneath your print to stop the drip. So then you take it off and it starts dripping everywhere, which is a bit of an issue. You can obviously go into the setting and then manually raise up the plate, which I do a lot of the time. So I raise it up and then I get like a drip tray underneath it and then take the tray off, and that stops mess from going everywhere. The other downside to this print plate is it's completely flat. So that means when it's finished printing, the resin just sits on top of it. It doesn't, you know, slide off. The vast majority, and I think pretty much every single one that I've used beforehand, has had slight angles at least. So that way, once your print has finished, that resin that's on top of the plate will slowly drip off. But on this, it doesn't, it just sits there. So you need to take a scraper and slide it all off, and basically like you're cleaning windows, slide it all off, it drips off, and then you can take your plate off. So just something to bear in mind. And speaking of mess, when you take your resin cartridges and you slot them down the back, that's fine. That works perfectly fine. Nothing drips out. But when you take it off, there is a little bit of drippage as well, which is, I guess it's physics and gravity and all of that. But because there's still some resin, like residue built up in the cap of this, as you pull it up, it will then drip out. So just be careful. As you take it out, it might potentially drip on top of the machine. So just make sure you've got your wipes and everything else ready to clean it up afterwards. Again, not the end of the world, but just something to be wary of. So along with this machine, they also sent me over their wash station and also the cure station. And the cure station is basically what you'd expect from a cure station. It does a really, really good job. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this part because otherwise this video will last for days. But I am going to talk about their wash station briefly because it is beautiful. And with this, it feels like they looked at the problem and just ignored all the other wash stations out there, because although they work, they also have their issues. This seems like a really, really smart design, and like it's been built from the ground up. So basically it has this, I don't know, the station, which is the thing, and it has this like rubberized texture with all these like corners in the middle of it, and it does the motion. So that bit does the motion, you know, like I'm doing there. I'll hopefully have some B-roll of this so that way you don't have to just watch me doing the motion instead. And then you also get these two containers, and the idea is that you'll put your models into one of the containers with your IPA and your cleaning solution. You'll pop it on top of this station here, and then the station will do all the rotating bit. Now, the great thing about this is, compared to other designs that are out there, is that residue that comes off of the resin isn't going to build up and get into the mechanism that is part of this wash station. Unlike other ones that have like those big old like containers and they have the whirly bit in the bottom of it, gradually over time, that resin can get in there, it can gum it all up, and it just requires some more cleaning. Doesn't happen with this, so the mechanical parts aren't going to get affected by the resin, which is amazing. It then also has the second container, and at first I was like, oh, this is great, you've got two containers, so maybe you can have one for a dirty wash and one for a clean wash. but that's not what they're there for. So you then take your empty container and you pop the container with all the wash and stuff on top of it. And it has these like little levers on the side of it and a button on top. And basically what it does is it's got this spout and it clips in, and then you turn the little valve, and then all of that cleaning solution will pour through from the top one into the bottom one, the empty container, and it goes through like a little filter grill, and it leaves it all empty on top. And this, in my opinion, is just a really good design because it helps to filter out some of the resin that's left over, and it keeps your IPA a little bit cleaner. Now, it's not going to keep it completely clean because it's just not. Your IPA is contaminated at this stage, but it helps to filter out any of those larger chunks of resin or supports and everything else. And then you leave it to dry for a bit, and then you can take your top container off and pop your models out. Now, this has a couple of other advantages as well that I didn't think of until I was using it, and that is how many times when you are printing a miniature and you put it into your wash station, they go in those little like metal baskets and the bits fall through it, and then you're fishing through all the IPA with your gloves on trying to find the bit that's fallen off. Well, this it doesn't, because it's got nowhere to go. It just sits at the bottom of that container. It's nice and dry, and you can get all your bits out so you don't lose them. I really like this wash station, and to be fair, I love the printer, but I'm really in love with that wash station. It is fantastic, and it's well thought out, and it is so well designed. I wouldn't be surprised if most other wash stations don't start to follow suit in a similar way, because it has so many advantages, at least in my opinion and my use case. So now that I've stopped gushing about that, I guess the question is, would I recommend this printer? And that really depends. For the vast amount of people probably watching this channel, you've either already got a Resin 3D printer, or you've already done a lot of research into it. And for a lot of people out there, they're probably going to look and go, well, no, I don't want this printer because I've got my preferred resin that I like using and I can't tinker around with this machine, and it's going to be locked down and all of that stuff. I completely hear where you're coming from with that, and that makes a lot of sense. But if this had been my first 3D printer, or my entry into the 3D printing market in terms of resin 3D printing at least, I think it's fantastic. It ticks so many of the boxes that will enable just your regular consumer who maybe isn't as techy or as able to understand all the bits. I think it's a really, really good machine. And especially for anybody out there who is, I don't know, has a print farm, for example, or is looking to start manufacturing their own miniatures. Maybe they're a digital sculptor at the moment, they have their own Patreon or something like that, and they just want to be able to get quick and easy prints off and make sure they work. Then you've got their prototyping resin, and then you've got their more flexible resins that are used for production and stuff like that. So they can move from one stage to the other and make sure that their supports work. They can make sure that everything else works. I think it's a really, really good idea. The big thing that I think that HeyGears could do to really help to alleviate this is have an advanced mode for the printer or their slicer. And whether or not that's within their own slicer, that you could click on advanced and then start to tinker with all your own settings and stuff like that and give the user their freedom to do things. I think that would really help to go a very long way with the community and get more people on board. Or even better, open it up to other slicers so that way people can use their preferred slicer of choice. Personally, I think that a lot of people would end up using the HeyGears settings and the HeyGears slicer because it just works really, really well. And within that ecosystem that you've got, I think it does a really, really good job. But giving the user the choice would go a very, very long way to get the community on board with this and get more of those people who are historically used to Resin 3D printing into using this machine. However, there is a lot to like about this machine, and I do really, really like it. And I know people will say, wow, you're a shill. You know, they sent you all of this. And of course you're going to say that. I said, no money's changed hands. I have loads of 3D printers. But this was the simplest resin 3D printers. Maybe not the simplest in terms of 3D printing in general, because I think that still just goes to the Bamboo Labs for me. But in terms of resin 3D printing, from getting it out of the box and getting it set up, to using the slicer and sending things over and getting a perfect print straight out of the bat, this is the best and simplest user experience I've had. And that's great. And even if you don't like their closed ecosystem and all of that stuff, which, like I said, I understand, I think it's a really, really good step because that brings Resin 3D printer just that little bit closer for the general consumer or for other people out there as well. Again, it all comes down to the type of person you are, where you're at in your 3D printing journey and everything else at the moment. But honestly, this machine is definitely worthwhile at least having a look at and making consideration. even if historically you've used other 3D printers in the past and you do like to tinker and stuff like that, it's still worthwhile having a look at if you're in the market to upgrade your machine. So I'll have everything linked down in the comments below, so if you're looking to pick up this printer yourself, they are going to be launching with an early bird deal as well, so you'll be able to make quite a decent saving with that. You'll be able to get the whole thing bundled up, and like I said, it's all going to be discounted down. So if you are sold on this printer, maybe you've used the past one, maybe you're looking for something that does print really reliably straight out of the box, then you can have a look at that early bird deal. I've had a really good experience with this, and this is pre-release at the moment. It's not got the full level of software there, so I'll be really interested to see what it's like once it comes to that full launch and everything else. Let me know any questions or comments you've got down below as well. I'll do a couple of follow-up videos if you want me to. The one that I probably will do a bit more focus on is what kind of resins can you use with this? As I mentioned, I've used some of my Sunlu resins with it. I've also used my Wargamer resin with it, and they've come off perfectly fine. And it'll be interesting to see what ones you have to match it to within the software to get the best results and stuff like that. So yeah, let me know if you've got any questions down below. Thanks so much to HeyGears for sending this over to me. Like I mentioned, a lot of the things that are room for improvement are just simple things that could be done within software. Some of them are hardware, like the build plate and stuff like that. But all in all, it's been a really good experience, and I can see this being a massive boost in terms of bringing people into the resin 3D printing market. And that's something to be celebrated, because the more people that get into resin 3D printing, regardless of the ecosystem they're using, that means the more users there are out there, which means the more files, the more types of resin that come through. There's so many possibilities there. So thank you so much for watching, and hopefully I will see you in the next one. Bye.